Joe, what's going on, man? Welcome to the Dad Edge.
What's good? It's great to see you, Larry.
It's good to see you too, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Yeah, so obviously, very excited to talk to you. Just a couple of points I really like to start with, though, is what was it like being little Joe? Growing up. What was your what was your childhood
man.
like?
Well, little Joe came in probably a little bit later. So, my mom and my dad, my biological dad, were together about 2.5 years total. They sort of had that whirlwind, fell madly in love. I came out of some of that love, which I'm really grateful for. And ultimately, I think they decided that relationship maybe didn't have longevity. And so we moved in with my grandparents. A couple of months later, I think we ended up going to this restaurant where my mom met who would become my stepdad, whose name is Joe Towne. And when I was 5, I asked to take his name. And so that's when I became little Joe. I was born Ariel. So I had a completely different life and identity in a way. And so I kind of grew up split between these two homes, these two identities, this idea of like I had this beautiful, loving, communal, spiritual sort of community, but I was growing up on Long Island in the 80s. And so the juxtaposition of the two, I always felt like I was straddling two worlds, if you will.
Wow. So, okay. So first name was Ariel or last name?
First name. Yeah. First name was Ariel. Middle name was Jonas, in part because my mom was Italian Catholic. My dad was Jewish. So there was this whole debate about whether you could actually take the name of somebody who's living. And I had, grandparents named Joseph, but that name came through a lot of my mom's family. So my mom's father's name was Joseph. Her brother's middle name was Joseph. My mom's first son's middle name became Joseph. So Joseph was almost the name that was passed down. And so ironically, or maybe not so, maybe synchronistically, she met a Joe and married him. And so it ended up becoming part of my name, but much later.
That's crazy. Do you want to hear something really serendipitous?
Yeah.
So my mom and biological father, they were married for 4 years before they had me. Then they went through a really bitter divorce when I was about 9 months. I mean, obviously I have no recollection of that. My mom met another man named Joe Hagner.
Whoa.
Yeah, right. It gets crazier. So they got married when I was 5 and he adopted me. So my actual original name, Lawrence Dale Boyd, was changed to Lawrence Joseph Hagner when I was 5. Isn't that crazy?
Crazy. Yeah. Names have some power too, right? Like, yeah. I don't know if you've done a deep dive into like the meaning of names or when you were naming your own kids, if you went through that whole, I know, there's plenty of websites. But I think there's a lot of power in the names that we choose.
Yeah. Wow. That's crazy though. So you went from the first name and everything. Now, do you know your biological father at all?
I do. In fact, he currently lives 3 minutes away.
No way.
But we did not have a close relationship for a long time. I mean, I saw him and I don't know exactly. I understand that he was so hurt by the relationship. And I would say that, a lot of that was sort of being played out. And I don't think he embraced therapy. I don't think he had a lot of people to talk to. I think he was living in this small apartment in New York City. I think he was struggling with coming off of these artistic dreams and now being asked to provide, never having had the emotional support for his dreams from his father. I think he maybe felt really stressed about providing and became a commercial real estate agent in New York City and had some success. But, I saw him every other weekend. And for him, he had to go to New Jersey on a bus, borrow his parents' car, drive to Long Island, which was at least an hour and a half, 2 hours in traffic every Friday afternoon, pick me up, drive me back to New Jersey, see my grandparents. We were there until Sunday, and then he would do the whole thing over again. And I think it was probably incredibly stressful for him. I don't think he managed his stress very well. I think he was really coping probably with mostly marijuana use. And so he did a lot of that in the car with me. And it really was not something that I was happy about. When my mom and my stepdad eventually divorced, most stressful day of my life that I can recall, sitting down in front of my biological dad, my stepdad, my newly discovered older brother. I'd always wanted a brother. I discovered I had a brother from my mom's first marriage, and my mom's new boyfriend. And I had to make requests of each one of them. I had to ask them for what I needed, and took probably many months building up to this conversation. But the thing that I remember asking him was, I really don't want you to yell at me, and I really don't want you to smoke pot in the car with me.
Wow.
And I still remember it because, it was like my first time that I can recall consciously having a request, as opposed to, playing it out in some other way or joking about it or telling somebody else and asking them to tell somebody. So, we had a fraught relationship. We didn't speak in high school. We stopped speaking for about 3 years.
Your biological,
my biological dad. Yeah. Yeah. I've always sort of stayed in touch with my stepdad, even after we were no longer living under the same roof. I reconnected with my biological dad right before the first week of college. I was at went to school out in California at USC, but in New Jersey, there was like a welcome brunch. You got to place out of language class and meet a couple of people maybe you'd be in class with. And I eventually met who would become my best friend in college at that welcome thing. But because it was so close to where my grandparents lived, I had brunch with him first, and then he drove me over there. And it was my first time speaking to him in many years. And it was really his new relationship with who would become my stepmom, where I started to develop a relationship with him. And she would put him on the phone with me, and she and I got along like gangbusters. And so I'm really grateful for all the healing that could happen later. And then in 2006, at a time when my career was really just on the cusp of flourishing, I just had a couple of roles in big studio movies. I'd worked for a year straight as an actor, which had never happened before. And it felt like a very rare, auspicious moment. I got a call that my dad was hospitalized with an aortic dissection, which is the thing that John Ritter died suddenly of. They didn't catch it in time. They sent him home. Well, my dad called my stepmom, and she told him to get his butt down to the hospital, and they caught it. And he had this, it shredded his aortic valve all the way down through his pelvis into his legs. He got his gallbladder removed. His intestine died. Like, it was looking pretty dire. And I just got on a plane and I went and I was with him. And for the next 7 weeks in the hospital, one breath at a time, it really transformed our relationship. I think it was watching the little bits of green bile, or whatever it was, coming out of that nose tube, and watching him not able to breathe on a machine. It really just dissolved a lot of the anger that I think I had also been holding on to. And it really transformed our relationship again. So I think the relationship with my stepmother, and then having that experience with him, and now he's playing an active role in my son's life, and he gets to see him. And how amazing that this happened in 2006. How amazing that almost 16 years later, he's still here on the planet and getting this borrowed time to be with people that love him.
My gosh. 800 and I don't know, 30 something episodes. I think it's been very rare that I've gotten misty eyed hearing a story, but I did, as you're telling that story in particular about, just being there with your dad. 'Cause I'm visualizing probably the things that you're going through in 2006. The career is just getting started. You jump on a plane, you're there for him going through this entire healing process. And it sounds like there was a lot more to the healing process than maybe you expected. Just backing up just a minute, your stepdad and your mom, they got divorced at what? How old were you?
So I was 9. Yeah.
Dude, this is blowing my mind. My stepdad, Joe Hagner, and my mom got divorced when I was 10. So
wild.
Really crazy.
Yeah.
The weird thing too is this episode with your father happened in 2006, right? Where there was a change in maybe how you guys operated, right?
Yeah.
I didn't know my biological father. I met him as a fluke when I was 12. So I had no recollection of him at all as a kid. Met him briefly when I was 12. We spent about 6 months together. He was married at the time, had a 2-year-old son, another one on the way. We hung out for about 6 months, kind of had the conversation of, hey, this is not a good time for me. I'm trying to restart, blah, blah, blah. Fast forward to 2006. I was in the Starbucks for a business meeting, and who came walking in to get their morning coffee with my father. And that was the first, I would say draw a line in the sand and we're going to start a new relationship, like start anew. And that began like a forgiveness process. And, here we are 17 years later, and, we're still have a great relationship. So it's fascinating how our lives have kind of been different, but similar in a way.
These parallels. Yeah. It's really moving.
And so now, do you still see your stepfather?
I do. Yeah. He just came out to visit. We started some new traditions, and it's been great developing new traditions, especially because a lot of the ones I had when I was very little were kind of inconsistent and maybe got disrupted. But yeah, he's been coming out and celebrating Christmas with us. And so we've had some really good times, and it's wild that they were in the room together for the first time. So my wife's mother also lives nearby, wanted to come over for Christmas. Of course, she wants to see her grandson on Christmas morning. Even though she was raised Jewish, they very much love celebrating Christmas. And I think she talked to my dad, and my dad was like, my biological dad, I want to come over and see Luke on Christmas too. I have a gift for him. I was like, well, my stepdad's going to be there. And it's funny, having them all in the room was so stressful for me leading up to it, and ended up being totally fine because they centered what the day was about, which was about Lucas. And so it was pretty wild having them in the same space, and it definitely brought a lot up in me. But it was really nice to see some of the dynamics. It was also really nice to see that things can be okay. It was really nice to see that it hasn't always been like that. It wasn't like that on my wedding day. It wasn't like that on many other occasions, the sort of jealousy or the different things that would come out, but seeing them all in the same space maybe was another log of healing in that fire.
Wow. And you also mentioned that, at that age at 9, they were, your mom and stepdad were breaking up. You had these requests. The boyfriend was in the room. Did she get remarried?
So she didn't get remarried at that time. She didn't get remarried again after that, but she did almost get married twice. My mom fell in love hard. And I think each time she probably thought it was for life. She was battling a lot at that time. And I think that's around the time that she was really getting pretty heavily into alcohol use. And so it was a few years there where we were on pretty choppy waters, because I was still living with her and visiting my dad and my stepdad every other weekend. And she was finding footing, and she was in some unhealthy relationships. And I think she had to hit some bottoms before she sought some help and went into recovery. And that stability really helped me by the time we landed in high school. But it was a dicey 4 years there.
Wow. Again, stories are crazy aligned. My mom was in and out of relationships, always kind of dated the same kind of guy. And my mom too, she fell very hard, very quickly, and dated, and she was married total of 3 times, but, battled with alcoholism really, really bad. And I think she was probably dealing with some of her own demons growing up, those types of things. But is she still in your life today?
So not physically. So right after I graduated college, she told me that she wanted to fulfill a lifelong dream that she'd had, which was to go on a pilgrimage to India. And I said yes, but I tried to get out of it. I really wanted her to go with somebody else. My older half brother, who again, I didn't know I knew until I was 6, is 13 years older, loved India. And so I was like, why don't you go with Scott? She's like, I don't want to go with Scott. I want to go with you. But I couldn't get out of it. It was a karmic thing, I think, that had to happen. We went on this trip to India. And the thing that really wasn't conscious for me was a conversation that she and I had when I was about 12, where she had casually told me that she had a dream where she took me to India and I died. Now, fast forward to I'm 20, 21, and we're about to go to India. I don't remember the conversation, but it all comes flooding back to me. When we're in India, I'm having this panic attack. I call her down to my room. I can't breathe. I can't speak. I was like, you told me that you had a dream where you took me to India and I died. And she said, "Oh, honey, I don't think it was a literal dream." So, I mean, that trip was something else. We ended up going with my brother, Scott. We ended up traveling, all of us together. And we both had about 2 weeks. We went to go see a holy man in Puttaparthi, India. I think my mom knew on some level that she was sick. She was in a little bit denial about it. There's some kind of things that seemed a little bit confusing about how long she had been sick. But because rumor goes that when she got into rehab and detox, they discovered like some cancer. And they wanted to do something about it. And she called a couple friends to the hospital with her who prayed by her bedside. And the next day when they came back to run some tests, they couldn't find anything. So they ran a bunch of tests, a panel of tests. They couldn't find anything. And so that was when I was 9. That was like around the time of the divorce. And here it is now, 12 years later. And she was going through to see this osteopathic doctor. And apparently when you get treatment, sometimes you go through something called a healing crisis, where like your body tries to heal anything that's ancient or old or, in different parts of your system. And so all of a sudden she became very jaundiced. And it turns out that they found some stuff going on like on her liver because she had been alcoholic. They didn't know if it was like cirrhosis or what was happening. Ultimately, it turned out that they found a spot on her liver. She didn't want to get it biopsied. They ended up, she wanted to go to India instead. And ultimately, when we came back from India, she started being dizzy. She was hospitalized. Turns out she had a large golf ball sized tumor in her brain. And so they operated on it. They successfully removed it. But in order to save some money, she had canceled her insurance policy in order to go on this trip to India. And she took out a travel insurance policy, but when she came back, she was uninsured. So they stopped returning her phone calls after she was released from the ER after brain surgery. And so she ended up not being able to move. She had to be readmitted to the hospital, and she basically realized how progressed it was. She finally saw an oncologist the second time she was in the hospital. And she said, "I want to die with dignity and grace, and I would like to go home." And they didn't want her to, and we had to lobby to get her to go home. And 3 of her best friends, including her ex-husband before my father, came down to be with her. And I cooked probably the only meal and my favorite meal I knew how to make. And that night, she called us all to the room, and I held her, and she passed away with all of us sort of singing to her. And it felt like I was giving birth to her wherever she goes next, knowing that she had done the same for me.
My gosh. So I can tell that this story obviously it's not easy to share. What's going on for you right now as you talk about it?
Just doesn't get any easier, just more time has passed.
Yeah.
And I think I really allowed myself to go there, which I don't often do. There's so much of life where we just have to get through this moment. And I work in emotion. I work in energy and motion. I work in emotion as a craft. Part of what I do as a coach is get people to connect to what's true. And usually when people say the truth, emotion follows. And getting to relive that story it's beautiful, and it's also painful. So they're both true, and they're both present as I'm sharing it with you.
Man, if I could share anything with you, and I don't say this to be patronizing or, doing that whole thing where I'm trying to make you feel better, but it's interesting that you're telling me this, because my 15-year-old, who's my oldest, was asking me, we've been having more conversations around death, and he's curious about it. He's just at that age where he knows like, oh, we're not all going to live forever. And he asked me, he's like, have you ever thought about, you passing away? And I was like, I've thought about the best way I'd pass away. And he's like, what's that? I was like, to be honest, just in my bed and surrounded by you guys. That's really it. I was like, just, you have my hand and the boys, everybody has a hand and they're just praying and or whatever we're doing. And, just being with you. Right. And that's really it. I mean, that is what I would want more than anything. It's just for you to be there. Right. And not saying like, I want to cast that spell on you, right, of you being there, but like if you're asking me what would be ideal, it'd be surrounded by the people that I care about most. Right. And you were that, which I think is what a gift, for your mom, what a gift. Right. Yeah. And so, as you go about, marriage, how long have you been married now?
We've been married for 10 years.
10 years.
Yeah.
So you have an incredible diverse background that wasn't easy. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't, obviously it wasn't the white picket fence and all that good stuff. So going into marriage, and I'll share this with you. My wife and I were together for 7 years before we got married. Mm. We were together for 5.5 years before we got engaged. Everybody around her was getting engaged and everybody was like, when? And I was always like, listen, I've seen some really crazy things in my childhood, with my own biological father, stepdad, my mom being married here, dating here to this guy would live here for us for a while. When I get married, it's going to be one time. Like, so I had this very deliberate view of like how I wanted to operate within marriage. And to be honest, like it scared the crap out of me. Like I was like, I don't know how I'm going to do this because it's kind of like, if I were to go to you for acting lessons or coaching, you'd be like, all right, man, here's how you play this part. Here's the 15 things you don't do. But the rest, just figure out the rest. Right. But here's the 15 things you don't do. It's like, okay, that's great, but didn't really give me a roadmap of what to do. Yeah. I felt like that was my template of like, here's what not to do. So I was worried about it. What was it like for you?
It's so interesting to hear you talk about that, because I think part of the reason why things took a longer time for me I didn't want to I wanted to do it the right way. I wanted to do it once. I wanted to do it differently than I had experienced it. My mom was married 4 times, almost 6. My stepdad was married 2 times, almost 4. My dad was married 2 times, almost 3. A lot of marriages. I did not want to go down that path. I wanted to do this, and I didn't want to do it once. And so there was a lot of stress coming up, and I had the exact same realization you described. I was like, I don't have any role models. I don't have any intimate role models. All my grandparents stayed together. Sometimes, in one case, their second marriage, but 50 years. And I was like, that's a different generation. Where are the people that I can look to that are not in the movies, that are actually together to let me know that I can do this? And there's one family friend. So my mom met my stepdad, and we moved into this incredible communal living situation. What I mean by that is it was called a White Elephant Mansion in Bayville on Long Island. White Elephant Mansion was a little bit too expensive, perhaps, for one family to rent, but it was enough for 10 individuals or couples to have their own bedrooms, a huge ballroom downstairs, a beautiful kitchen, a mile of private beach, this incredible tree out front. And we were there for over 2 years, 2.5 years, from 1.5 to 4. And the gentleman that started it, this visionary named Miles Meilinger, he was a fascinating guy. He went to Wharton School of Business and decided he loved working with his hands. He wanted to make leather goods. So he started dumpster diving for leather scraps. And he started sewing together these incredible vests and stools and different pieces of clothing and trying to sell them. And somebody noticed him dumpster diving and welcomed him in and allowed him to pick up scraps on the floor. And he did that for years. And he made this incredible flourishing business, which his son has taken over, which happened for many decades. But he had this similar vision of a communal living situation. And he was looking for the right property, and he wanted it to, bring together friends who are like-minded to break bread and have interesting conversations and be there for each other. And that's all it was. It was like, it took 9 yeses and only 1 no to welcome in another person. And we were fortunate. We were invited to come and live there. And Miles and his wife, Judy, loved me so much. Judy used to take me to the supermarket and pretend I was her son. They'd say, "What a beautiful child." And she'd go, "Thank you." And whenever we'd be in a car driving, and how many miles till we get there? I'd say, "Miles and Judy." Miles and Judy were my like iconic couple of who I looked to. And so it came to me in that moment as I was getting stressed leading up to proposing. Okay, I do have one role model and I can look to them, and that's enough to get started. And so, yeah, that we had a very similar, seems like, entryway into that first big commitment.
Man, that is so cool. I'm smiling because, like I said, my mom was married 3 times. There were men constantly in and out, that kind of thing. Every guy was kind of the same guy, heavy partier, and heavy drinker and that kind of thing. But I did have one solid role model in my life, and that was my mother's dad. So my grandfather. My grandfather was a blue collar worker. Like, he was like a man's man, right? And he was married to my grandmother for over 50 years. And I think my grandpa, it was unspoken, but we lived a mile from them. And I think my grandfather kind of saw what was going on, and he really did this amazing job of like, hey, let me pick Larry up after school. Like, and I can just, bring him over to the house. And cause I lived like 1 mile from my mom. My mom was working a lot here and there and going out and that kind of thing. Or like, hey, why don't you let him spend the night? I spent the night on the weekends quite a bit over there. And I got to see this amazing example of a man love his wife. And my grandfather is as much of he had rough hands, manly man, but man, he just loved my grandmother. He would always like hold her hand. Like, we'd be sitting there eating breakfast, and he'd just pat her on the hand and be like, I love you. You're so beautiful. I love you. You're so beautiful. He would do that. He intentionally publicly loved my grandmother on purpose, and she loved him back. And I didn't appreciate that back then. In fact, I remember sitting there and watching it, and I'd be like, I remember as a kid, I'm like, man, there's something about this that feels so good. Mm-hmm. And now looking back on it, I was like, it made me feel really safe. You're in this house where you see people love each other, and you're like, wow, this is an amazing feeling. I don't know what it is as a kid, but I know what it is now. But I did have that example. And now, my kids, my wife and I have been married for 18 years. I love my wife, how my grandfather loved my grandmother. And it's funny because like, we're very affectionate. I purposely compliment her in front of the kids. I hug her, I kiss her, I do all this stuff. And it's kind of funny. Like, I was joking with my 15-year-old. I was like, yeah, I didn't want to let you know this, but me and mom are breaking up. And he just like, he just laughed. He's like, yeah, I just wanted to play a joke on him. He's like, I wouldn't believe that for a second. Like, there's not one part of me that even believes one word of that. And I was just like, all right, I was just messing with you. But it's cool. He's like, you and mom, he's like, you guys gross me out. I'm like, good, we should. But that's really cool that you had those people in your life. And so what's been 10 years of marriage like for you?
Well, I would say that, the beginning stages of it, we both fell in love as young artists here in Hollywood. We're both actors. We were both creating together. We were writing plays at night after coming home from the theater. We had a really cool sort of coming together story. We loved telling that story. And I think we loved travel and finding joy and simplicity. There were some times we loved to go out for the big adventure, and other times I used to call her my perfect eating companion, because I remember one time she went out and brought home our first like feast and smorgasbord, and she picked everything that I could have imagined. And one thing that was new and different. And I was like, that's the perfect combination. And so a lot of our early relationship was being young artists and going out and battling in the world. And I think that there have been these waves that have happened, and we're in many ways becoming different people. So she transitioned. She made a big transition from being a young actress into being a writer. And she had been working at that for a long time. She had a couple of things hit. She had a TV show that got picked up. She had a movie that ended up going. And so she was able to make the leap away from the hustle of driving all over town and working 3, 4, 5 jobs and just focus on writing. And it's been really inspiring to see what she had vision for herself and what she's created. And the stories she's telling, super fun. She loves good rom-com. She's a writing partner for television, and they've got a couple shows that they've been able to put together. And, it's just amazing to see that work happen. And at the same time, our lives started to almost diverge in terms of our creative life. And so the creativity got channeled into some collaborative projects, smaller projects on the side. And we struggled for a long time with fertility and getting pregnant. I mean, we not alone, but we had multiple miscarriages before we had our first son. That takes a big emotional toll. We're really fortunate that we have this beautiful boy. And it wasn't our last miscarriage even after. And so there's been a lot of body blows that we've endured. And it's just hard right now. It's like a hard time for the world. And I think we're trying to figure out who we are.
Yeah.
I think we're trying to figure out what our priorities are. I think we're trying to figure out where to connect. It's weird talking about connection when you're all in such a small footprint. But this year we ended up moving unexpectedly, and we've just tried to be the boxer that stands back up after every body blow. And so it's a little bit like the dramatic part of Rocky right now, with the music swelling and, digging deep,
Part of the reason I love doing this podcast so much is because no matter where high profile folks are operating, right? People see you and they're like, oh, your life is all figured out. You're successful. You're this, you're that. Like, you don't have any problems, right? But I relate to, in particular, the infertility. So my 15-year-olds, I have 4 boys, but the first one was not easy. It was so many attempts. It sounds crazy, but after a while, like sex became stressful because it was just an occurrence of us failing, right? And that became very hard, very difficult. And then on top of it, we ended up having to do in vitro, got pregnant, and then suddenly that was, I don't know what happened there, but suddenly becoming pregnant was very easy after that. But it was hard. We had several miscarriages. Actually, I wrote a book called The Dad Edge back in 2015. The last chapter was about a traumatic loss. We actually have 5 boys. My wife unexpectedly miscarried at like 20. Well, it was expected. We were 22 weeks pregnant, and she ended up having him in our bathroom, and it was pretty crazy. But we knew that he actually was not going to live because he was diagnosed with a condition called trisomy 13, and we had to make a decision. Do we keep this child or do we terminate? And that was one of the hardest decisions because our religious beliefs is not to terminate. But we were like, are we doing something inhumane but we decided, hey, this child was created out of love. So if he makes it full term, then he's going to pass away with love surrounded by his mom and dad. And, and that was very difficult. And then I think God had other plans, thank goodness, which was to take him early. But, like we were talking about before, it doesn't matter what level you're at, celebrity or whatnot, that kind of thing. We all put our pants on the same way. We all go through experiences. I mentioned to you, I just had Matthew McConaughey on the show, and I asked him, now Matthew can say anything and people will believe him, right? But I asked him about marriage, kind of like how you and I are talking about. I was like, tell me how you constantly date your wife and keep the marriage fresh. And he could have said anything and it could have, people would have believed him. He's like, I gotta be real honest with you. I kind of suck at that right now. And I'm like, really? And he just said, he's like, yeah, we've both been really, really busy. We're in the season of a lot of busyness right now. And you asked me that question is reminded me that I haven't been really great about that. But, it sounds like you guys are in this spot right now where, I think it's actually really normal. I mean, because you and I are the same age, both, in our mid 40s and 5-year-old son. And I think that it's in the 40s that you're like, oh, wow. Yeah. Life is fragile, right? Very, very fragile. Not only that, but we have this son who's now becoming a little boy. He's no longer really a toddler. Now he's becoming like this little boy. And that's like a whole chapter in of itself. And then, add on the other challenges that we've had with the pandemic. And another thing, moving will test any relationship, right? But I get the sense though, that your foundation seems to be solid though, even though right now there are just challenges out there.
Thanks. I think that work on foundation is probably the biggest practice. And I think it starts with ourselves.
Yep.
And I think sometimes it gets these blurry lines over time, like where we end and our preferences end and our habits end and where the other person begins. And it's so easy to go to the other person, I think, say, hey, this is what's going on for me. And I've heard you talk about this desire to jump in and just, help and fix. And I think that coming back, this period of time feels like a coming back to our self, our core self, identity, who we are, what our daily practices are, how do we fill our own cup, and how do we let our connection stem from the filling of our own cup. And so to me, that's the foundation, that's the solidness.
I agree. In fact, I say this all the time, on the podcast, is that when men graduate college, get their careers, they get married and they start having kids, immediately they stop taking care of themselves. In fact, we almost view it as like, oh, I can't do that. That's selfish. Mm-hmm. Right. So it comes from this really noble place to, I have to serve. Right. But what happens is we have a generation of fathers that when we have that view, overwhelmed, stressed out, burnt out, and now they're just like, wait a second, I kind of feel like I'm losing myself. Mm-hmm. Right. So I'm really interested. What are some things for you that you've noticed that are immensely important for you for self-care?
Yeah. Daily morning routines have always been something that have mattered to me, and they've taken on a ton of different shape. But I noticed for a period of time, I would say up until even a couple years ago, when our son was very young, I was just sort of reacting to the world. I'd get up when I'd hear a cry and I'd go in and take care of him, or I'd get up when the alarm told me to. And I think part of it was I was trying to hang on to my old life at night. I was trying to hang on to the finishing of the show, one more conversation. I wasn't really that on my phone as much as I was like, let's just keep the party going. And, it's been a long, hard day. Let's live some life. And I think that I had to interrupt the pattern, and I had to get up earlier, and I had to take that time and do it on purpose. And there have been periods of time when I've had 70 seconds of a morning routine and times when I've had 45 minutes. I guess some of it might continue on if I include, and then I did some stuff and went to the gym, or I went to do some stuff and I did yoga, or I went for a hike. But really, as long as I meditate in the morning and hydrate, as long as I get in touch with that still voice somehow, and as long as I can take care of the basics of my nutrition, maybe it's supplements, maybe it's a smoothie, maybe it's my morning coffee, the way that I know I love to have it. But when I fill up with that, I don't come in depleted. So the essence of self-care to me is everything before the performance, or in this case, before the day, filling up with what I want to bring with me. And then making sure that I have touch points along the day to remind myself, hey, what's the main thing today? What's the main thing? What's the intention I set? Or remember that thing that came to you, that inspiration, that little voice? Remember that? So these little touch points along the day, and then making sure that the end of the day is really about recovery, recuperation, reflection, and setting up for a tomorrow. So that's the essence to me of not only self-care, but optimal performance in every field.
So it sounds like you have these like a bookend theme. Mm-hmm. So here's how I start and here's how I finish strong. And without those, life will tend to probably manage me. And I'm the exact same way. And I love how you talked about it. It could be 70 seconds or it could be 45 minutes, because men are full throttle or no throttle. Oh, if I can't have the 45 minutes, then I'm just not doing anything at all.
Totally. I've been in that stage.
Yeah, I think we all have. What does 70 seconds look like for you? And what is, I actually, you've already shared what maybe the 45 minutes would be, but if you only had 70 seconds, what's most important?
Yeah. So this is inspired by a sports psychologist. I can't take credit for this order or what these are, but there's a sports psychologist, Dr. Michael Gervais, who says, if you don't have 70 seconds, you don't have a life, right? So the idea is like breathe on purpose. Like, let's get up and first let's breathe on purpose. So a deep breath. If it feels good, do 2 or 3. It doesn't take that much longer. But then I really love connecting to gratitude. And I don't mean thinking a thought about something. I mean connecting to the feeling of gratitude. So for me, it helps if I put my hand on my chest. For me, it helps if I think of something new and something specific. So if I just say like, I'm grateful for my health, it doesn't move me. But if I'm like, oh, my ankle is really feeling better. That feels really good again. And I can really take in the feeling associated with that specific new thing. Then I'm sort of filled with gratitude as I move into setting an intention for the day. And I don't mean like, let's go book the crap out of all the jobs. I don't mean something I can't control. I mean controlling something I can control. So I'm going to seek to be really curious today. I'm going to seek to be really interested rather than interesting. I'm going to work to remember my breath, particularly when I'm busy, whatever the thing is. So I want to write it down later. I want to put it top of mind, but set an intention for the day, a controllable one. And then the last thing is I want to stand up and feel my feet in the floor. And if I'm feeling frisky, I might put on some tunes and move my body in a way that feels good. So I get that energy ripping. But that would be the fifth. So, those things take about 70 seconds. And I did it every day for 7 months. And it was a game changer because there was no excuse. And once I get into a flow with something, and once I make it a habit, I'm really stubborn in a good way. That's like the positive side of me being a stubborn Taurus.
That's awesome. Is it fair to say that I think the biggest thing I pulled from that was I don't do gratitude. I am gratitude. I don't do it. I be it. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the way that you really harness that is exactly what you said is it's not only like, oh, I'm thankful for my health. It's like, no, how can I tap into the emotion that connects me to that feeling of being healthy? Right. Maybe it's my ankle. Maybe it's the air in my lungs. Maybe it's how I feel when I'm going out for that run, but it's like actually tapping into the emotion that's behind that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we're big complex machines. So maybe my ankle isn't feeling good today, but maybe my lungs are.
Yeah.
Or maybe there's always something we can scan for if we practice. And the science around gratitude is pretty powerful. It's the scanning for it that matters. It's not always the finding of it. It's the dedication to the scanning for what's good. And in terms of bookends, you may have heard of this practice, the 3 good things practice.
Mm-hmm.
So at the end of the day, scanning for 3 good things. And you can think them to yourself. You can jot them down. You can share them with another person out loud. And reliving them helps us. And it puts us into a state as we're about to drift off to sleep too. So I love that as a bookend.
So true. Man, this is good. I'd like to switch gears and just talk a little bit about Lucas. I used to ask the question, what is most important for you to teach Lucas as he gets older? But now I'm very, very curious is what have you learned from Lucas about yourself?
I think I've learned, the kid just wants to play.
Yeah.
Just wants to play. And he loves to do it together. He doesn't like the feeling of loneliness. He loves the idea of sharing in that joy. And so this time right now, when he's, whether it's because of a break or because of an outbreak at school or because of whatever, being cut off from people that he just plays with in a play-based environment. It's painful and he doesn't know what to do with it because he doesn't have the tools to talk about it. But he's constantly reminding me to stop my busyness and come and play. He's constantly reminding me that by playing together, we're going to feel better. He's constantly inviting me to like check my stress and to say, enough lessons for the moment. And he's a mirror, above all, he's a mirror. He looks just like me. I recognize facial expressions. And I knew I wanted to be a dad in many ways to repair what I felt I experienced growing up.
Sure.
And so it's a blessing. It's a blessing to have that opportunity. And sometimes the urgency takes over. Often the urgency takes over. Often the desire to protect. Often the desire to get him to live up to how I think he should be when he's older. I keep having these struggles with, is this going to mean he's like this in 20 years when he's 5? And so my desire to grow and learn is kicked into high gear with him. And it's funny, prior to him being born, I had a practice. So while my wife was pregnant, there was one thing that I was dedicated to doing, which was, all right, I know that there's so many unknowns that I'm going to face when he's born. So what I really want to do is fuse together feeling good while learning new things. And so I made myself a list of dishes I'd never made before. Lentil soup, pickled vegetables, like whatever. I had the whole list of things I'd never made before that I wanted to learn how to make. And it was something where I'd put on music and I'd get into a good feeling space and I'd have enough time and I would make a dish. Could be on a weekend, could be in a night, could be for an event. And I hoped that that would carry over into being a young dad. I hoped that that idea of feeling good in the discovery of the unknown would carry over. And when I'm at my best, it has. And when I'm not at my best, it's all the usual suspects. I shortchanged my morning routine. Something urgent happened and I had to take care of a crisis and now we're in triage. Or, work demands, relationship demands, whatever it is. But I just have to look at him and I get that zing. I just get that zing. And he is a beautiful mirror and reminder for me about play.
Isn't that fascinating? So I've, like I was saying, 4 boys, 15, 14, 8, and 5. So my youngest is the same age as Lucas. And what I've noticed is we call them the bigs and the littles. I'm very different I go about fathering differently with the littles than I did when I had the bigs at that age. And my 15-year-old and my 14-year-old, they're both old enough now where they pointed out to me, like, hey, you didn't really do that when we were young, or you didn't allow us to do that when we were young. I'm like, yeah, I was a little wound up, a little tighter back then. And now I know that those types of things aren't really that big of a deal. Right. But you mentioned something in there about play. And, I've got the biggest imposter syndrome, I feel like, on the planet sometimes, because I run Dad Edge podcast in our community and all that stuff. Yet one of the hardest things for me to do is play. Right now, I do well if we throw the football or go to the track or we go to the gym. Right. And I do that with my bigs. The area that I struggle is that 3 years old to 8 years old. Right. It's the Legos. It's this, it's that. Cause I'm just like, man, there's a part of me, it sounds terrible, but I don't want to do those things on the surface. But here's the funny thing. As soon as I start doing them, I'm like, oh, this is awesome. I kind of, once you're in the mode, you're like, oh, this is actually really cool. Right. But on paper, it's like, I don't know if I want to do that. Let's go outside. Let's do this. But here's the scary thing. I don't know if you know Todd Herman in your industry. Todd Herman, he wrote the book called The Alter Ego Effect. He works with actors and pro athletes on basically tapping into an alter ego to elevate your performance. Right. And he talked about he talked about this thing where you don't want to play or you don't want to do something, and then you tap into an alter ego of like, well, Mr. Rogers would want to. So why don't I just assume for a moment that I can step in maybe to that persona and just be Mr. Rogers for a minute and just see how it feels. And that is something that's fascinating. The other thing he shared too is, and this is true, and you've gotten emotional talking about some of the crossroads that you've been through as a father, but the statistic is 80% of our one-on-one time with our kids is gone by the time they're 12. And one of the things, and I feel you, man, because I feel like in a way we're somewhat kindred spirits because of the way we were brought up. Fatherhood is extremely important to us. At the same time, it's like, it's really important to me, but I'm also creating it as I go because I'm not exactly sure how to navigate because I've never really seen it, but I think I know what to do. my 14-year-old, for about a year now, he's been in this, we used to want to do everything together. Well, now his friends, and he's, talking to a girl and that kind of thing, they've become ultra important. And I sent him this text message, and it was really hard. And it actually made me cry. And I sent him this text message. I was like, hey man, I'm just checking in, I don't really see you that much anymore. And I feel like when we're together, like you don't really want to talk to me that much. And I'm always really good about asking him open-ended questions. I don't want to ask him how his day was. I'm like, hey, what was the best part of your day? Why was it so meaningful to you? What are you challenged with right now? Who do you love sitting at lunch with, and why? Like, I ask him these questions.
Meaningful conversations.
Yeah, meaningful. And he's been pretty ninja about like still giving me like these one-word answers. And so I challenged him with that question. And he just it actually blew my mind, the emotional intelligence that he had, and how safe maybe he felt telling me real honestly where he was at. He was like, I don't feel that way at all. Like when we're together, we still talk. He goes, but I'm at an age and a point in my life where my friends are really, really important to me. And not that you're not, but my friends are very important to me, and time with them is important. And I'm like, oh, like, man, that was hard to hear. And I remember like reading that, and I was like, oh my God, this feels like a dagger in a way. Like, even though he didn't mean it that way, but it was a reminder of like, oh, he's there. He's at that age. And so now what I'm doing is I'm going about fatherhood a bit differently with my 8-year-old and 5-year-old, because I know like I'm on the clock.
Yeah.
Right. And when my 5-year-old, can we read one more story? Yeah, we can. Right. So it's fascinating to have that sense of urgency. And yet when you're a new father, you don't really know it's there sometimes until it's a little late. But that's a huge lesson, especially for the guys in the audience, because I don't know a whole lot of guys who do have that gift of like, yeah, I want to get on the floor and play Legos. Some guys are, but some guys it's very tough. It just is what it is. I do have a different question for you. Let's fast forward to where Lucas is 10, right? 10. And you've been married to your wife for 5 more years. What things would if you and I were to re-record another podcast 5 years from now, and you'd be telling me about some of the things that were most important for you to create memories and experiences and connection and that kind of thing, what things would you be celebrating if we were talking in 5 years?
Well, I think the number one thing that is a pain point for me, given the state of the world, are the challenges around travel and perspective and what that does. So I'm hoping that 5 years from now, we're celebrating living in another culture for a period of time. I'm hoping that we have been on mountaintops and had the rain sort of beating down on us, and we've been in the elements. I'm hoping that we've done more hard things. It's a common theme we've talked about since he learned to swim. The idea we can do hard things. We're going to do hard things together. So I'm hoping that, we have times that we have such an epic failure, we laugh ourselves silly. Maybe we get into laughter fits. I hope we continue cooking together and get to the point where he's as creative in the kitchen as he is with his Legos right now and his imagination. I'm hoping that I can get up on a board and because I know he loves it, and I'm hoping we can find a way to be up on a board together, and then I can learn how to balance while surfing. I'm hoping that, we decide to stay up to see shooting stars, and we decide to get up early to go to see a sunrise in a beautiful place. And maybe we've grown something other than like chard or tomatoes or oregano, something bigger, so we can look back and see what patience can bring. Those are a few things come to mind.
Oh man, that's cool. I like that. Would you be up for a quick, like sort of fun, maybe 2 or 3 lightning round questions?
Heck yeah.
All right, sweet. Okay. So looking back on all your roles in acting, what is a role that you've identified with most as far as who you are as a man?
Oh, as a man.
As who you are.
Yeah. I would say there was a role that happened pretty soon after I moved to Los Angeles to pursue acting. Moved back to Los Angeles, I should say. I came to school out here. I moved to New York, ended up moving back, got an agent. And my second job, which happened very quickly, happened within a couple months of moving here, was it was about this boy who was locked in this attic. He's an artist who was locked in this attic to be protected by his grandparents. His parents had passed away and they were worried they were going to take him away. So it was for a show called Providence. And it was an episode called The Kiss. And it was an episode where Melina Kanakaridis, the lead actress, was having this recurring dream that this young prince climbed a tower and gave her a kiss. And her character discovers me, and I have this brain tumor, and it's starting to make me forget what my mother looked like. And it's happening almost like a year or two, maybe 2 years after I've lost my mom. And my mom's half Italian, half sort of, Eastern European. So here I am playing this like Eastern European artist who's forgetting what his mother looked like. And it was like a top of show guest star, which was a very big deal for me to have that experience. I was 8 days working on this project, and I had all these synchronicities and serendipities. Like my character's name was the name of the meteor shower that was happening in the sky. And, all these things that were relating to my mom. And the director, Melanie Mayron, just held space for me as I was almost channeling through all of the grief and putting it on a screen. And it ended up being a very moving experience for me. She really facilitated it with the crew. The crew is extraordinary in terms of holding space for me and allowing me and my coverage to go maybe out of sequence from how it normally would, because they could tell I was really in this. And I think as artists, it sometimes can be somewhat dangerous to constantly use our own stuff.
Right.
Because psychologically, it may not be the healthiest approach. Maybe our imagination gives us a little more flexibility and distance and psychological safety. But the idea for that role, I didn't have the skills to do anything other than that, just show up. And so that was a pretty powerful one.
Wow. Now I'm gonna have to go catch that. Go find that.
You'll also see a young John Hamm in that episode. He was guest starring as well.
Oh, so, yeah.
Yeah. It was pretty cool.
Awesome. Yeah. And what about for 2022? If you and what's your wife's name? Erin. So if you and Erin are holding up a glass of champagne on December 31st, 2022, celebrating something amazing that happened between just the two of you, what would you be celebrating?
I would say, to me, it would be a long-held project that we work on together. So there's a script that she wrote before the movie that came out in the theaters a few years ago. And it's gone through a couple of incarnations, and it's been rewritten, and it's something that she and I would be producing together. And so the idea of getting to bring her story to life and celebrating that journey and pouring the love into that movie, that would be something incredible to celebrate.
That's so cool. I love that. Working together as a team.
Yeah.
I want to make sure that you can give the audience exactly where to find you for those of them who want to follow you. I know you've got all kinds of resources and all kinds of things that you do, but where can men connect with you, and what can they go find?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm at the usual suspects, Instagram and or Twitter and Instagram at me, Joe Towne. So holler at me, Joe Towne, if you want to have a conversation. I'm totally down. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find the company that I created is called The Performer's Mindset. So that's theperformersmindset.com. It also has its own Instagram page at The Performer's Mindset. So the idea there is that all of us on some level have to perform, whether we perform on a stage, on a field, in our kitchen, in a boardroom, and that there are tried and true practices that science offers us on how to get switched on for life's biggest moments and how to regulate and calm down and reflect and grow over time. So I'd be happy to have a conversation on any of those platforms.
Oh man, that's so cool. Well, guys, not to worry. We're going to have all of Joe's links in the show notes. If you go over to thedadedge.com/360 for this show, again, thedadedge.com/360, we'll have everything in there for Joe. Joe, this has been awesome, man. I just want to honor and appreciate you for your incredible authenticity and vulnerability. I can tell that you genuinely care about how you are going about fatherhood and how you're going about relationships and just life in general. And to be honest, man, selfishly speaking, I think we've walked a little bit in each other's shoes growing up. And I think that's also why it's so intimately important, to you and to me as well, is that, man, and we know what it feels like when it gets screwed up. And that's not something that we want to happen on our watch. So I just want to honor you for that, man.
Well, I got to say, this was such a surprise in the best possible way. You created such a great, safe container. I'm really blown away at how emotional I felt today during this journey. And I can't thank you enough for your thoughtful questions, for wanting to have this conversation, and ultimately, like, the mission that you're on, the circles of, men learning from other men, and, sharing experiences about parenthood and fatherhood, and being a good partner in life. So appreciate you. Thanks, Larry.
Appreciate you back, my friend. Thank you so much for coming on today.
What a joy. Yeah.
All right.
Thanks, man.
Thank you.